Hello, my friends. How are you today? We're going to do Loudness Part 2. Bring Jon on here in a second. A little bit of housekeeping real quick. We got a skeleton of the Discord server up. Shout out Hendrik and Iggy who've been helping me set that up. If you are a Discord user, DM me, and we're going to start doing invites this week, especially if you are a mod on other people's Discords or you're actively involved. Hit me up about that. And then Bradley, just saw signed on there, Slow Hand Sound, been doing show notes. We're going to get that up in the next few days as well. So yeah, Discord people, hit me up, and we'll send some invites this week. All right, I'm going to bring Jon on right now. Yo,
what up?
Double beanie day.
It's that day.
Beanie babies. Damn. How you doing, man?
Beanie babies. I'm good. I'm good.
You ready to talk about loudness more?
Always.
Always. So tons and tons of questions from last week and this week. For those of you that did not watch last week, what are you doing? Go watch it.
What are you doing?
Yeah, what are you doing? We introduced the topic, tried to do some definitions, and talked about it generally and philosophically, and we'll tie a lot of that stuff into the conversation today as well. What I realize, I don't want to become this solely, but I realize that I think we have an ability to define things for people that cause a lot of confusion. I think people are really confused about the terms for a lot of things. So I want to just start out. There's lots and lots of questions about clippers, soft clipping. What is it? How do I use it? And I'm like, we did a whole thing on clipping. And then I realized we didn't do a whole thing on clipping. We did a whole thing on harmonic saturation and distortion, or I actually don't remember what it was called. It was like the sixth one we did, sixth or seventh one. I'm like almost near 40. But I think it's important for people to understand that in the large umbrella, there's a large umbrella term or a large umbrella category that includes clipping, both hard and soft, harmonic saturation or saturation generally, distortion, overdrive, and then even that is sort of like to me, under the umbrella of things that compress dynamic range. So there's a lot of confusion out there for people on what is soft clipping and how do I use it. And I guess soft clipping, and you can feel free to jump in and correct me, but in my mind, soft clipping, if people don't know what it is, you think about what hard clipping is. And what hard clipping is when you take a waveform, let's say you take just a sine wave, and you push it so loud that it goes to zero digitally, the top of the waveform literally gets cut off. And so you chop off the top. So hence it's clipped. It's literally snipped off. So you don't have that part of it because you're at zero. You only can go up to zero on digital. And what soft clipping does, or the idea of a soft clipper, is instead of chopping it right when you get to zero, as it approaches zero, it starts to shape the waveform and reduce it slightly. Rather than having a hard clip, it does a soft clip as it goes up to that level. But that includes things that, it starts doing harmonic distortion depending on the medium, depending on if it's actual tape machines or tubes or emulating those things, or something like Decapitator can do soft clipping / distortion / harmonic saturation. They're all kind of the same thing. It's not exactly true because there are boxes that are specifically a soft, like a hard to soft clipper, like the T-Rax thing. Basically, you can hard clip with it, and then it has a knob on it that changes the knee of it, which makes it softer. But essentially, we're talking about the same thing, which is reducing transients in order to get more level. Is essentially when people are talking about loudness in a mix and mastering, you are compromising transients at first and then overall bass and potentially other things, but you're sacrificing transients and dynamic range in order to get more level. And how you choose to clip that stuff, how you choose to distort it, how you choose to saturate it, is kind of up to you. We've talked about this lots in the past. Jon has some great tube hardware that fulfills some of that. You're now using a soft clipper in your a plugin in your chain as well. You're receiving things that probably have saturation clipping on them. So there's clipping, harmonic, saturation, distortion, overdrive in various parts of the process at various times. So this idea that like soft clipping, it's become sort of a hot term, I think, because of the Fruity Loops soft clipper plugin, which is basically just a variable knee
overdrive,
saturation. Like they're all kind of the same thing. So I also encourage people who are really curious about soft clipping, think of soft clipping as another version of harmonic saturation and distortion. It is important to understand conceptually. You could do a little Googling, the Wikipedia page, other things like that. We'll show you visuals of waveforms literally getting cut off at the top. But I would also go back and listen to if anybody in the chat can basically let us know in there which episode that was. But we did a whole episode on harmonics and saturation, that sort of thing. I think would be really useful to people. So maybe we can get into details on some of that stuff, but I think people are just a little confused about soft clipping as this magical term, when really it's just another way to do harmonic saturation.
I'm glad you said that. It's just another tool to achieve very similar outcomes.
Episode 6. Thanks, Bradley. Episode 6, we did saturation. So we talked about the harmonic series a little bit, talked about harmonic saturation. But if you are distorting something, if you are clipping something, I guess hard clipping doesn't do harmonic distortion. It's a different thing. But basically it's reducing harmonic content or adding to the harmonic content in a different way. So it still is doing it. It is, but it's more of a flat line. It turns it into a square wave, which is a harmonic distortion. Yeah, it is.
It's destructive, more destructive though. So just to think about terms of in usefulness and transparency, when we're talking about getting extra level in the context of loudness, you're going to want to use a soft clipper more than any sort of hard clipping, because the hard clipping is going to change the sound of your mix or signal in general way more than a soft clipper. So we should come at it in this context that the soft clipper is more applicable in what we're talking about today. A hard clipper is like, think 9 Inch Nails, think more aggressive industrial sound. It's not subtle. Soft clipping, you shouldn't be able to hear soft clipping.
Well, and a lot of these things have variable controls that go from hard clipping to soft clipping, and you should definitely play with those things. I think we're gonna probably get away from clipping in sort of the mastering loudness process pretty quickly, because there isn't actually that much to discuss about it. I mean, there certainly are a few different ways to do it. You can do it with a series of plugins where you have some saturation plugins, some soft clipping, and then a limiter at the end, and you can play with which one is doing more reduction or more saturation, and it depends on the transients, it depends on the song, but that's, I think people think of, okay, if I find the right soft clipper and limiter, then all of a sudden my stuff is going to be a couple dB louder than everybody else. And the truth is, that's just not the case. The limiter, the soft clipping, hard clipping, limiting at the very end of the process, maybe if you do it in the best way, it'll get you a dB that's a little more transparent than somebody else. But the reality is, like, just straight up limiter or soft clipper, there's a half dozen out there that do a very similar thing, and they will make very subtle changes to your transients in the mastering process. But the reality is, things like gain staging, things like arrangement, treating individual sounds in both depth and frequency range is going to be way, way more important to your loudness in a mix than anything else. And it's hard for people to understand. And early on when I was mixing, it was hard for me to understand as well, when I would be mixing indie bands alongside working on like Taking Back Sunday with Eric Valentine, and hearing Eric Valentine's aggression in those mixes and not achieving them in the same way myself. I had to learn about gain staging and the getting some distortion on the low end of the snare drum, and then getting a separate channel for the transient to poke out, and then doing parallel compression on the drum bus.
Just listen to that on Sunday, by the way.
Yeah,
sounds sick.
The problem, I think, is that people think that you're going to find a solution for loudness out of limiters and soft clippers. And really what you're going to do is you got to just mix better.
It goes with the same theme that every episode has, which is just, there's no shortcut. You're not going to come onto this platform and listen to Matt and I discuss any topic, and there's going to be a simple one-stop shop answer for it. And clipper is definitely not it. In fact, a clipper doing too much weight, too heavy-handed, is going to sound like shit more than not. Yep. So that's not the answer. It can be part of the answer. It's part of my answer for this new mix bus that I'm trying this year, and we'll see how long it lasts, but I'm trying it out. But it's very, very subtle. Like, it's not heavy-handed at all. Because I can hear with my proper monitoring, I can hear when it goes too far. And it goes too far very quickly, depending on how much low end, right? Depending on how your arrangement, how the arrangement of the song mixed with your arrangement and your gain staging and your gain structure and all of this that is in my control, then at the end, right? So again, there's no one size fits all. And that's kind of the theme of our conversation, which I love because it makes people think a little harder about the entirety of the process.
Yeah, and going back to episode 6 months and months and months ago, where we talked about saturation, a lot of what allows for loudness without just trying to clip things and crank it up and distort it is saturation and density. Density in mixes we've talked about before, so maybe we can touch on that a little bit more today. When I think about density in a mix, there's a lot of different ways to think about it, and we've touched on this before, but I think when people hear density, they often think a whole bunch of stuff at once. And when I think density, I think that's a way to get density, is to put 10 things that add up to something. But the ideal way to get the loudest, clearest mix is to have fewer things that don't get in the way of each other, that take up the right amount of space in the frequency range and the dynamic range.
Yes.
And then, because if you have 4 or 5 things competing for the same space, you're going to have a ceiling to how loud. Let's say it's your mid-range and you have a vocal and a guitar and a synth, and they're all here. Nothing's going to be able to pop out loud enough. But if you just have one thing or 2 things sitting in that range, they're going to be clearer. You're going to be able to literally turn them up louder, and the perception of the loudness will be clearer.
My favorite question is if everything is loud, is anything loud?
Yes. That's hugely important. And I think people get caught up in trying to maximize their mix by just cranking it and limiting it. And the reality is, creating more space, carving things out, will allow you to turn the whole thing up without sacrificing transients, low end, that sort of thing. Because that's ultimately what you do when you're cranking things up. There was a question on here, and maybe we riff off this in a second, or if you got more thoughts. JC asked maybe my favorite simple question, which was, I send my songs off to mastering and they come back with less bass. Why? Well, maybe not.
I could riff on that, but just quick pause, quick
please.
Interjection. I'm having a technical issue, just so everybody knows. My chat is dead. All the numbers and all the things is dead on my end, so I'm not going to see if people say anything to me. So I'm not ignoring people if they're hitting with good questions. I can't see.
It's all good.
I don't want to restart the feed.
Yeah, all good, man. I'll ignore them for you. I'm just kidding. I love the chat. Yeah, I'll ask you.
No, that's a good question. I'd answer it with another question. Did the mastering engineer make it louder, and did it need to be louder? If it was made louder, you're going to not have as much low end. It's impossible. Yes. And did it need to be made louder? Maybe that was a sacrifice that in your mix, you didn't balance out the frequency spectrum properly for it to translate and get to a certain level. So then that's a dialogue that you have to have with your mastering engineer. If it was made loud and you didn't want it to be that loud, or didn't need to be that loud, then go back. That's why there are revisions.
Yeah, and that's what happens, when you start relying on clipping and limiting and that sort of thing for loudness. You will be sacrificing low end because, one, it takes more power and more space to have big low end, and 2, modern records have a ton of low end. So if you want to start,
not a ton.
The good ones do.
Yeah, but a lot of the big records out there right now don't have good low end. So that was my next thing, which is the big records that are out there that are super smashed,
that's why they don't have good low end. I mean, we've talked about this, and without going in and
well, what is good? You know, what does good mean? I mean, like the most successful records on the charts right now don't have good low end.
A couple of them do.
Eric Valentine's Taking Back Sunday record has more low end than Positions does.
Positions is a very weird mix. So that's a good example of,
it's still holding the number 3 spot in the, like, globally.
Yeah. So that's
not a good mix.
So that's an example of a song that is super, super, super limited.
Yes.
And
that doesn't have to be to still achieve the same level of success on the charts.
And it doesn't, and it sacrifices a huge amount of low end for it.
Yes.
And that's something that I think important conceptually that.
No, that's not a sacrifice. Hold on, let's pause. It's not a sacrifice because a sacrifice implies gain. There is no gain from that choice to have no low end on the success of the song is kind of what I'm talking about. So to say something is good is obviously subjective, but there is no objective gain towards the success and the level of connection that record has to its loudness and lack of low end. So it's not a sacrifice. You're sacrificing low end for loudness, for level, but not for emotional connection and success of the record. And I think we have to be thinking about these things in broader terms than sacrificing low end for gain. Cool, that is a statement of fact, but do we have to sacrifice gain for success? Yeah. And what we're really all trying to do is have success with our music to some degree, not maximum chart success. It could be for a movie, and there are successful parameters that movie records and sound design have to sit in to feel the best in a theater. And have an emotional connection to the nervous system of the human's body. So that's what I mean by, like, that's not a sacrifice because we're not gaining anything from it other than the term gain. And we don't need more gain to connect.
Well, and as we talked about it a bit last week, there's this funny dance happening where sometimes people are listening to music without any normalization, and therefore the loudest mixes, the loudest masters, I should say, will sound the loudest compared to other things. And then there are people who are listening with loudness normalization on Spotify or Apple Music. And when you take off the loudness normalization, a record like Positions feels like it has no balls to it, no bass in it. And that's, there's no good answers for.
It's a damn shame. It's a damn shame because that record can go.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to. Just as a fan of music, like, why does it sound like that? I think that's why I pick on that one, because it could have equal success and sound better. There are some records that will only have the success because of how they sound. That's not one of them. That one would have the exact success level. Maybe even more. Maybe more. I'd argue it could go more.
Well, so let's get into some more. I don't know if there's really much else to cover on clipping. I mean, like the difference between the FL Studio soft clipper and the T-Rax or JST or these other things, you can have preferences. I don't think they matter that much. I mean, I think almost everybody watching this and those participating like myself will benefit from better gain staging and a better mix than whatever clipper you're using. The idea that...
Honestly, I think these are more advanced techniques. I think it's after you understand what gain staging is and arrangement can be, that these tools help emphasize those things in a hopefully transparent manner. Like my ability to perceive the benefit of the clipper in a subtle way is because of my ability to have proper gain staging in my mix.
And you've done it a lot.
Yeah, and practice. But that's what I mean. Like up till now, my experience lets me understand why and how to use the clipper. And I could explain that, but I'd have to show how. Also with meters moving, where things are hitting. There's no way to explain how to use a clipper except for turn it up till you hear it go, and then turn it back down a little bit.
And that's you don't want to hear. Somebody said a great mix. Somebody had a question on your Thorir, if I'm saying that right, Thorir. And I don't actually know what it's referring to. Is the mixer or the master? Is it the mixer or mastering engineer's fault? And I think all of this stuff, the unfortunate thing with where we're at in terms of where we're talking about with the consumer listening, sometimes it's normalized, sometimes it's not. Streaming, I guess it's all streaming now. There's no more MP3s, certainly not CDs. You're compromising. Someplace you're compromising because you can't have something, you can't deliver a mix to a major label, pop artist, whatever, that's the master is at like -11. They just won't let you do it. I mean, maybe that's true. Like a final master.
I do it all the time.
A final master?
Yeah, -10, -11, -12. Yeah, sure.
You've delivered -12 on like a pop record?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe you can do it, but it's not just a mix, but an actual finished master?
We'd have to ask Dale, but yeah, I'm sure we have. Sure.
Okay. So in the sense that it's going to be 6 dB quieter than Post Malone?
It's not 6 dB quieter. By numerically, it might read quieter, but it's going to sound louder. It's going to feel louder. You're not going to say that's a quieter record. You're just not going to say that. If it's bright enough, if it has enough presence and enough low end and enough top end, it's going to, and a mid-range determines a lot of loudness and how it feels. No one's going to say it's quieter. I'd
be interested to A/B those. I don't know if I've heard that in fact, but I certainly believe you.
We could find that out. I could figure that out for you for sure. Wait, let's go back to the question though. Let
me get to it real quick. So whether that's the case or not, you're still going to make some compromises in order to get more level. And are the compromises going to be transients, low end? And maybe even if you don't compromise, maybe you would argue that there aren't compromises, but understanding that all of these tools very, very quickly lead you to a loss of transients, dynamic range, adds distortion, you can lose low end. So in a process where there are producers, there are engineers, there are mix engineers, there are mastering engineers, and you get something at the final stage that isn't great, that isn't right, or the low end's lost or something like that, everybody in the process is at fault / no one's at fault. It's part of, you're going to make sacrifices. And if you are a mix engineer, if you're a producer, if you're a mastering engineer, especially if you're a mastering engineer, but all these other things, that's why we talk about these things, so that you can understand what each of these tools is doing, so that when you get a master back, or you get a mix back, or you get something back that doesn't sound right, you have the tools to figure out what's wrong with it, or what, how to communicate. Your relationship with someone like Dale, who's an amazing mastering engineer, you guys have a great ability to communicate with each other about what you're after. And now you've probably done it so much that there doesn't need to be as much communication, but you as a mixer have to be able to talk about transients and low end and LUFS to know what your goals are, so that the mastering engineer can do their best job. And vice versa. If you're a producer working with a mixer, if you're a mastering engineer working with the mix, whatever it is.
Let me jump in here.
Jump in.
This is a personal one.
Let's go.
If I have my way, there will be no distortion, audible distortion on a final mix or master.
Meaning the difference between your mix and the master?
No, either one. There should be no hard clipped final masters going to a streaming service.
Okay,
that is preventable. What?
Let's define those two, because distortion, there's distortion all over everybody's mixes.
I'm talking about a very specific digital clipping distortion that everyone deems as bad and wonders where it's coming from. This is an objective
and it's on a lot of songs.
This is an objective distortion that when you listen to, you don't say, that's cool. You say, why did that happen? I can be okay with this, but why is it happening? It's what Thorier is asking. Like, who's to blame for that? It's not saying, again, that the record isn't going to have success because of it. But there is an objective distortion that was not on records until a certain decade of time, where certain tools found their way into usage plentifully. And I think our job as engineers is to make sure that the energy comes through with distortion the proper way, with none of that happening. It's very possible. People did it with way less tools, with equal loudness for many, many decades before this. And we're now in a box, no pun intended, in the box, that is making that more prevalent, and it's not enhancing the audio listening experience or the human body connection experience. There's something about it that's like, that's better, because people like who just said that are noticing it and using the word blame to be had. So I can say from my personal experience that the only time where that is approved at the end is because the producer and the producer's engineer, whoever, wanted it that loud for no good reason, and then it needed to clip and distort by the time it was finalized. Because nobody would have approved it.
Yeah, you say no good reason, but and I'm not saying that these people are correct. But the only
reason is demoitis.
The only reason is they want it to be louder.
Yeah, that's not a good reason.
Yeah, I agree.
Just pushing back.
But
that's no good reason. It's not a reason. I know there's a reason.
I think it's important for people to understand even that you're going to work with people until you're Jon level, and even when you're Jon level, you're going to deal with people wanting things louder all the time. And I think that's one of the challenges for a lot of people. I mean, it's a challenge. I mean, you and I have dealt with this. Again, we won't name the project, but there's a recent project that you and I both worked on where the demos were very loud, and that's why we talk about people.
Yeah, but the final mix I sent is not too loud. It's loud, but it's not too loud, and it's not distorting.
Would it be if you had
because I was allowed to do my job?
Yes,
and I didn't just bend the knee and say.
It took some communicating. It took a mixed version or two. It took people living with it. It took your expertise in the topic and the trust
in the team and the A&R specifically, who fought the battle alongside with me.
Shout out to A&R. I hope he's. I talked to him this morning. I hope he's watching.
But that's what I'm getting at. There's no good reason. Everybody agrees that they don't want that. But how do we achieve a similar level of energy that was in the rough, that was too loud? That's our job, right? That's my job. My job is to, okay, cool. You have, like, I just did a dance record, and the dance record was at -4 point something, and I delivered the final mix at -8 point something, and it sounds better. The artist is thrilled. It's not distorted, and nobody said it wasn't loud enough.
Yeah.
It's just like, I'm proving it day in and day out. I very rarely get asked for something to be louder.
Well, so go ahead.
If anything, it's make it more like the rough in some sort of distorted way. And then there are other ways to do it without hard clipping the entire mix to get level. And that's what takes a trained engineer's ear to hear certain bands and where energy is prevalent in a rough, A/B it. That's why I take this really personally, because this is this is what makes us good. This is what makes certain 100%. People sit above others in our abilities to do this job. I think that just needs to. That's all I got. You want to jump in?
I just want to jump in because I think what you said there is a perfect example. You got a -4-ish LUFS.
Yeah,
probably very loud. Distorted, transients destroyed, very limited.
Did not make you want to dance, and it's a dance record.
And it was a super aggressive and in your face in a way that didn't have whatever bounce you needed for it. And you delivered something that's 4 dB LUFS, -4 more of LUFS with the same energy and presumably not a bunch of clipping and limiting. So I want people to understand conceptually what that is. You took something that was incredibly distorted, that was measured louder, and then delivered something that was 4 less. Is it measured in dB? Is LUFS measured in dB? Also, okay. Yeah. So 4 less dB, but yet has the same energy and probably doesn't have a bunch of maybe has a little teeny bit of soft clipping with your new thing, but with your new setup, but
not aggressive.
And the way you achieve that. So Jon did not achieve that by finding the right limiting clipping plugin. He actually took a bunch of it off and then restructured the mix.
This is an easy one to talk about. In fact, I just turned everything down 10 dB and then brought the things up that needed to be loud, like the rough was presenting them, up. And then EQ'd the energy in the way I wanted it to be, and sound designed my own way to create where the energy was coming from. But I turned everything down 10 dB so I can get headroom to create where is that 4 dB of loudness coming from. It's just a recreation, and that's gain staging. So that's
I like
going back to those episodes. That's what's important.
I feel like I feel like I don't want to answer a lot of the questions with you should go watch this episode or that episode, but really you should. Like these are, you know, finding the right limiting soft clip or whatever is not going to change your mix. Gain staging, understanding harmonic saturation, creating headroom. Like somebody said,
I reiterate, I love doing these conversations with you on a Tuesday because this is what I'm doing. Yeah. Like I just did that last week, and it was met with like capital letters and exclamation points on how good it felt. And it's quieter.
Yeah.
Quieter.
So you use this term, which I really like. I got the term, obviously you didn't invent the word, but density I really like from you. But you use this other term, energy. Can you talk about what you mean when you say where the energy is coming from? Because I think I know what you mean, and I think it's a really important concept. I'm sorry, on the chat there real quick. Lauren, all these episodes are on YouTube, LiveWithMattRad clips. We have stuff there, or on my IGTV. So you can search there. And and the audio's on Spotify and whatnot. Okay, sorry, go ahead. So energy.
The energy comes from a lot of places, right? So just taking a step outward on our conversations episode with Ryan Lewis was discussing the energy in the room coming from like a single person who's controlling the energy, maybe the more outgoing person, the more connected to the song, right? So that is starting in the conception of the song with a person or two people or a group of people. The energy is already in there, right? So my job is understanding where that's coming from. And because I've been a writer or a producer in the room, I can usually tell like what the first what was birthed in the conception of this idea. Like that sounds like it was written to the bass. Like that bass line is so front and center. I bet they played a bass guitar and wrote the melody to it. So the bass is driving it. The energy is coming from the bass, right? That's an example. Sometimes you can hear soft piano chords and it's a ballad and the melody. Well, obviously the vocal is giving me the energy. Where in the vocal? Is it in the higher mids because it's in that range? Like the melody is a fifth above or an octave above the chord structure. Like where is it coming from? You can tell it comes with experience, right? You can mathematically figure that out. I can play the chords and then hear where the melody is and tell you. And then in that frequency range, like that's how geek you can get. I never do that. I don't give a fuck about that. But listening and understanding arrangement is my job. So where's the energy coming from? Those were two examples. So mid-range, low end. It's still that 5-band spectrum, but thinking about it musically and not numerically.
So think about really like what is the emotional focus?
Yes.
And the emotional focus could be, like you said, a sad emotional ballad, and it's very vocal forward, an Adele record where you know the whole energy of the mid range and the high mids and things like that is just vocal, and almost like everything else is low pass, and so there's all this space and low end, and of course none of her vocal is going to be in the like 100 cycles range. It's all mid range, but nothing gets in the way of that for a lot of those mixes.
Yes.
But then there's other records like I just saw it was the 10th anniversary of Party Rock Anthem, which is like.
Wow. Vengeance
kick, some vocal.
Everything's synth. 8K and above.
It's just, and again, it's bright.
It's noise.
And that record has a certain kind of energy and a certain kind of focus.
Well, yeah, because you're listening to it on alcohol or drugs and you're dulled in those senses anyway. So you have to have enough to keep that up while those senses are dulled. Like
So they call it in disco, they call it the cocaine sound.
Exactly.
In the 70s, people doing cocaine, you get fucked up. It's late at night. You lose your high end, so everything was brighter. So it's important conceptually when you talk about energy. I like that you started with being in the room as a writer, what that feels like, understanding what the intent of a record is. And I know people are always like, okay, what plugin do you use for X? But it turns out all the people that are really great at this go, okay, what am I focusing on emotionally? What's the story?
I'm trying to preserve all of that. Because that's already there. If that's not there, then my job's different, and that's cool too. But I then that's not what we're talking about here.
And so when you're talking about the mix process, and I think this idea of where's the energy in a track, it really does apply to so many parts of the process. I'm producing two songs for a new artist right now.
Sorry. It sounds meta in a sense, but like it's actual physical energy. Sound waves are physics. That this is the energy is coming from something. I'm not trying to be new agey or anything. Like it's actual physical energy. When we're talking about loudness and LUFS, it's measuring energy. So I'm talking about it scientifically. Also emotional, like the connection, who's driving force of the song, instrumentalist, vocalist, mostly the vocalist, but where's the secondary energy coming from? Is it chords? Is it drums? Is it the groove? That's all is technically subjective, but I'm talking about scientific energy. Like what's the loudest focus? And how is it impacting the nervous system?
That's exactly the right way to put it, I think. What's the focus? And you can make decisions in a mix, because again, if you try to focus on everything, if everything's loud, nothing's loud, your mix is not going to sound loud. It's not going to appear loud. It's not going to measure loud if you just turn everything up to 10. If you figure out what are the focuses, it's generally likely to be vocal, maybe drums, maybe another instrument, but it depends on sections of a song. It depends on the type of instrumentation, depends on there are guitar vocal songs where the guitar is not featured at all and should be really low and really low passed and really muted because that's the energy of the song. Figuring out creatively what you're trying to focus on. I was saying I'm producing 2 songs for this new artist, but she's very young and we're kind of figuring out the sound as we go. So we're making both mixed decisions and like emotional, philosophical, creative decisions. Obviously it's going to be based on her vocal, but like, is this, she plays guitar, she plays piano, or what are we leaning towards? And we're trying things and we're trying to
what's she going to do on stage? And,
focusing different things in the mix, focusing different things in the production and the arrangement of a song. And those things, making those emotional choices, which if you're a mixer, a lot of those are already made for you. But you've said this a lot of times before, even if you're not writing and producing a song, you'll get a mix and you'll go, oh, I get that they're really trying to, it's these 3 or 4 things that are the most important in the song. And these other 5 or 6 things that are in the mix are not that important and they're just taking up space. So that's what you're talking about. If you have 20 things in a mix and the rough mix is loud and they're trying to feature everything, and you go, oh, it's really just these couple of things. Take everything down, bring these 3 back up, and all of a sudden the mix is clear.
I used to do that. Louder. Yeah. I used to, in fact, do that with like kind of that dense Dr. Luke production, Max Martin style production of that era. If I get a record either from Luke or someone in his camp or from someone that's just like emulating that thing, I would send, this is lame to everybody to hear, but I would like name a bus like bullshit group or something, like the things that don't really matter. And I would have the main synth melody, the main everything that was clear, the band, like the 5 instrument band that was happening. And I'd send everything else to the other bus and either do one of 2 things. I would lower the volume or I would suppress some of the upper mid presence or broadly EQ or filter this group to take up way less space, but keep it at a similar volume. It's like, it was one of those 2 things. A lot of the times it was the latter. It was a bit more of like leave the volume so it has that density, but like take out everything in the vocal range. Like, why is there 12 synths doing the same bell part?
Yes.
Like,
yes.
It just
happens
it's
all
too
the time,
much. It's just too much.
Yep.
And I know the theory behind it. It just send the same MIDI to every sound on my keyboard and just see which one sounds, oh, now they all sound like a cool sound that no one's ever heard. Yeah, sure. But that's noise. Yeah. That's not distinguishable, informative, connecting material. So let's turn that or warm it or do something to it. And I think you can still think that way now with less tracks. Granted, a lot of mixes are coming in with way less tracks than at that time, which is it's a better trend in my opinion. But that was a challenge to maximize that density that we always talk about and energy, but also like, where can we suppress some of it? Because this is a lot and it's exhausting and a whole album of this is not going to work.
Okay, I think the big, if we can do one little, I just said big and then little, but big little secret, which I hate doing this sort of stuff, but I think this is actually really true. I think the thing that people miss the most in getting loud mixes is the tool of reduction. And we've already talked about this. You and I have talked about this a bunch, but
it's all I do.
Yeah. Say more, because this is the concept that I think people are missing.
I reduce 95% of the time.
You're filtering, you're reducing volume, you're obscuring, you're suppressing, you're taking things out of the way of the important shit in a mix.
Yeah, it's more of a sculpting, surgical approach to mixing than additive boosting approach, because a lot of that's done in this style of production that's happening. It's just aggressive. So I don't need to be more aggressive than it already is, so I could let the aggression shine in the right intended places and reduce accordingly to make more room for that. So.
Well, that was the Rick Rubin thing back in the day. I've never actually seen it on a record. I just heard this over and over. But Rick Rubin, the great producer who does not play an instrument or touch a knob or anything, and like says so openly. But one of the things he's famous for is taking things out, and like on a record, even a more modern record like Kanye Bound. It's just a vocal and a sample basically the whole time. Apparently that was a whole full Kanye production with a beat and everything. And Rick Rubin just said, take away everything except the sample. And all of a sudden that's like the most insane in your face. There's no drums except for one moment where there's a giant low synth that sounds like the biggest thing you've ever heard because there's nothing else around it. But he used to get credit on records back in the day, not as producer, but reducer. And I've heard multiple stories from people. I've only met him a couple of times, but where his big thing was take this out, take that out. It doesn't need that. There's a huge amount of value in terms of loudness, in terms of not even just literal LUFS loudness, but the perception of loudness, which I know is what you talk about a lot, that people confuse measurable loudness with the perception of loudness, and the latter, perception of loudness, how something feels, is the only important thing. It's literally the only important thing. I mean, if
numbers don't matter. The only reason numbers matter is so streaming services know to turn it up or down.
And so things like getting the arrangement right,
which is not a reason to make music.
It's an important thing for those that are the conduits to the consumer, and it's important for us to understand it. Now let's figure out how to make shit sound loud and great. And it comes down to filtering, reduction, surgical things to get pieces out of the way of the focuses in tracks, things like that. So getting loudness is more about taking things away for most people than anything else.
I have a rant riff to go on about this quickly too. If the producer, everyone should understand it. That's the impetus to this rant. Producers, songwriters, and engineers starting, you should rely and trust upon the engineers at the end to output the proper loudness. If a producer says, I have to do it because I'm never happy with a mix, then you haven't found the right mix engineer. We know how to do it. So find the right mix engineer. Try new people until you develop your relationship with someone that you can trust to do that part, so you don't box in the process of how it's going to sound later. If you think that you're going to mix it yourself, then that's fine. Whatever, go for it. But I think that the trust factor in finding the relationship with the mixer and the mastering engineer is more important on this journey, because you got better things to do. Producers got better things to do, like make a tight beat, make a tight arrangement, and then do it again and again and again, so you can keep your success leveled up and your freedom up to do whatever you choose in your life. You shouldn't be thinking about loudness. When in doubt, go quieter. That's all. That's my little riff. I haven't,
I like that. And as someone who is primarily a producer and writer, but also mixes some of my stuff, I still totally agree with that. Because it's funny, I had this, I don't know how much to get into this, but I had kind of a moment in the early aughts, is that right? Around like 2010-ish, where it was like, okay, do I go into full-on mix mode and try to compete with, like, Serban at the time was the guy. And I did some mixes and was doing things that I think, were on that level, sounded great. But I realized if I was going to be a mixer, I really just needed to be a mixer. And that's not what my brain does. I don't want to be a mixer all the time. I want to play bass and I want to make beats and I want to talk about emotions and write lyrics. And it's okay if, the majority of those things never see the light of day. And I know you and I have talked about this before. You essentially went the opposite path. You're like, I love mixing. I love the refining process. It's more satisfying to you for all the reasons it's more satisfying to you. And I think it's an important thing for everybody who listens to these things who's starting out, try lots of things, but it's also okay to settle into certain roles. And I love sending things off to great mixers. It's just, that's, my shit sounds better that way. Although I like mixing, It's like sending it to great mixers is always amazing. Man, there's so many like Clipper questions, and let me see if there's anything else, any particular things. Do you have
No, I thumbs down the Clipper question.
Thumb down Clipper.
I don't have, no, I feel, I was going to say like, yo, is everyone enjoying what we're talking about? Because I can't see it. And part of this platform is to be able to see.
Lots of hearts, chat's going crazy.
All right, I hate that I can't see, because it's part of the whole thing is interjecting with the audience, and I don't really.
If you guys want to send
a little
some
disconnected
love,
this time.
Yeah, send some love to Jon in the chat, and I will translate your messages.
A little disconnected.
They are people are really enjoying it.
I feel like I'm just ranting at this point, and I like to rant and then break up my rant.
No, there's lots of love. I'll look at all these hearts. There's loving this. Yes, 100. People are loving it. People love you, Jon.
Okay, well, do we have any questions then? Because we haven't done any specific questions, so maybe we should for the last 15 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, we're basically answering them all in a batch here.
Cool. I think that this philosophical approach is really what matters, because it really ties. We're answering questions by tying things back to other topics we talked about, and really, loudness comes from gain staging.
Okay, real quick, people. This is great. Just tried Topo Chico, and it's going to break my bank. Keep the ranting. It's great. We love it. So people are very excited. Maybe we could do the last 10 minutes or so on transients. And I think, when we've talked about this a lot before, but it's always a topic worth going in on. When you start limiting and clipping and that sort of thing, your transients are the first thing to go. It's one of the things that like I consider a secret. Like, it's one of the things that if I had a secret, I would keep to myself. This would be it. So let's just like get rid of all secrets in the game, and let's just talk about it. I put transient shapers after most dynamic or saturation tools. Right? Like, I make up transients almost after every move of those sorts. And I think that's where, like, I don't notice other people doing this, where they'll have like the transient shaper on first in a chain. Like, if I get a session, it's like this first thing, then there's a Saturn or a decapitator. It's like, well, you just got rid of the thing that you were boosting, right? Yes.
Now, I don't disagree with the idea that the transient shaper could be the first tool. So do that, shape the sound you want first. Like, maybe you're trying to repair the source material. Maybe there's not enough transients on an acoustic guitar for your ear. So you do that first. That's your instinct. Cool. Let's do that. And then you want to saturate. You want to bring up some even order harmonics, and you want to kind of, control the dynamics of the sound a little bit more. But then you notice that it's a little soft again, right? So then, like, let's put another one. Like, do that. Like, I think these kinds of stackings are more interesting than 6 limiters.
Yeah.
I think, and maybe the transient shaper the first time is like super sharp, or maybe it's a broad stroke one. Maybe the first one's a broad stroke one, and then you balance out with your saturation or your limiting or your compressor or whatever you want to use. Just
real quick, we're talking about two not competing things, but they're essentially doing opposite things. There are
when it comes to transients, I'm talking about we're talking about transients. Yeah,
specifically transients. Now, we've talked about this before, that a lot of people will use compressors with a certain amount of attack to get transients to pop out, and that is a way to do it. You don't like that?
Kind of.
It's a method for doing it. But
because it's using the existing transient and a bit of it to do that.
Yes.
Versus now we have a tool that can already read that with AI.
Just reads it. Yes, exactly. So this it's a better tool. Well, it's a contemporary better tool. Using a transient shaper, a transient designer that will basically allow you to manipulate the transient of any signal. And then when you saturate something to add density, to add harmonic content, which is desirable, you are going to be reducing transients. So it's the balance of those two things. What order you put them in changes it. The order of plugins, as people know, will change how things affect each other. So sorry, continue.
Please, thank you. One caveat I'll throw in is this is not a beginner method, and I would not do this if you don't understand fully the perspective on why I'm talking about this. And I would do it very minimally in multi-band fashion. I wouldn't just throw, like say if you don't want to affect your low end of a bass, so you put you only want to affect the transients from like 200 hertz up, or only in the mid range. You're introducing phasing issues in those crossover points. There are no transient shapers that have inaudible phase issues. They don't exist. So this is not something that just like throw it on and keep doing it, because you will fuck things up. So when I'm talking about layering, I'm talking about maybe 2 in different parts of the chain. I usually do it only once, but I have done 2 times, and I don't think I've ever done 3 of them. But multi-band will throw a kink in the whole thing, so I don't use it multi-band 9 out of 10 times. Just so people know what I'm talking about. If we're
people are saying you've mentioned spiff and neutron before. I use neutron as well.
Yeah,
the transient shaper is really nice.
I'd say at this point I'm only using the neutron one. It's the most transparent one to me. Spiff is cool. It's just for some reason my brain doesn't choose it. It's also like I don't know what's going on under the hood of that one. Neutron either, but it's simpler. I think it's doing less to my ear. Again, these are things that are like, someone could prove me wrong. Rory, I'm sure, will tell me more about what's going on under the hood of these things. But to my ear, there are more benefits when they're not a multiband, and I'm not afraid of them as much. And I don't go up more than 2 or 3 on the attack on each instance of it in neutron. 3, it's usually 1 or 2 or a point in a decimal within that. So just so I don't want to throw people off and just like they're putting things at 10. Sure, if 10 works for you and that's the sound you want, you only want transient, sure. But in a mix process, that sounds really aggressive. I have done that in parallels. Like if I'm doing a parallel kick, I'll put the attack at 10 because maybe that's all I want to get out of it. So there are instances where that happens. But the idea of transient makeup after dynamic control, we'll put it there more broadly, I would mess around with that. I would tell people to try.
So again, I like that you said dynamic control, because we're mostly talking about saturation, but saturation is a form of dynamic control. And when we're talking about density and loudness, dynamic control, which can be done with a compressor, a clipper, a soft clipper, a saturation box, all those things are forms of dynamic control, and those allow you to reduce dynamic range. But oftentimes when you're reducing dynamic range, you're losing transients off the top. So you reduce dynamic range, let's say on a snare drum or a clap or something that has a nice click to it. But because you put a saturator on it, which thickens it up, which allows it to be to appear a little bit louder, you've then lost some of the transient. So after you thicken it up, you turn it up, then you can add some transient back into it. So that's one of the many ways you can do that.
There's a solid LiveWithMattRad clip for you.
Yeah, put that on TikTok for you. There's this is how you make
that's a good one. I would say if I had a secret that's to offer, that's my secret. I do it all the time. I'm not ashamed that you all now have the knowledge. Go for it. Make up your transients after you dynamically control things.
And again, these are all tools to make things feel exciting, appear loud, pop out without either having them just be wildly out of control and too dynamic, but also not just hard clipping and limiting and killing your transients. So it's
transients make you dance. Like transients make you move, right? They're back to the beginning of this conversation.
It's the anchor. It's the anchor. Boom.
Yes.
Boom.
Yes.
Those are all like, it's the anchor to your beats and vocals.
Yes. And that's nervous system shit, man. That's hitting the body. That's telling us what to do. And that's what I care about. All these tips and tricks and tools that we have access to are to implement the human connection to the music. I know it can sound a little bit heady, but that's the job. Yeah. There's nothing else I'm supposed to do besides enjoy my time doing it and then make other people enjoy their time after the fact. It's really what it's about. And enjoy your time with dancing or a sensitive moment of reflection and breakup and heartbreak and all the feelings that can come from it. But we as engineers and producers and artists and all of us have to understand what it is that we're going for. And these tips and these tricks and these tools do make that connection deeper. They can, but they can also distract us from it. I had a good friend, I'll do a little quick side tangent, very successful engineer. I'll keep him out of the name. Hit me up and thank me for doing what we're doing. Mixed with the conversations, but it was mostly about LiveWithMattRad. He went on a binge and He's killer.
Oh,
He's
awesome.
he went on a binge, and
I've got some cool feedback too. It's been really cool doing this.
And just like one of my favorite mixers, and I'm like, you are great in what you do. But he's like, you're the complete opposite. You talk about like putting 1 to 2 plugins, and I have a plugin on every instantiation in Pro Tools. Like he's like, I put a plugin on every slot, and I'm like, dude, that works for him. Like I'm not gonna say that to not do that. I think it's overkill. But he makes shit sound musical, bump and groove, right? Like he does it right. So I want to publicly say that to you, bro. Keep doing what you're doing. But I would wonder about a conversation between him and I about like, is there excess, right? Like when Tony and I were working together, I would do that. I would put a shit ton of plugins on, and the first thing he would do when it was his turn to look at a mix, like say I was starting one, but it was his gig, so he was finishing it. He'd just bypass. He'd be like, what's it doing? And like, honestly, I'll admit it, he took off most of the shit. And then after the end, he wouldn't talk. He didn't, it was his turn, it was his turn. So he'd take off all the shit. And I had to learn like why he didn't. But sometimes he would go, why are you doing that twice? And I was like, well, I'm doing it with this tool because I think this one sounds like this thing. And I'm doing this reduction with like the Pultec instead of the Pro Q because it's a wider bandwidth and the Q and like all this stuff. And he's like, cool. Do you want to just take out 200 hertz? Just take it out. Why are you doing it with different things? And I'm like, philosophically, I understand why I'm doing it and why he's doing it. His way is better. It's just better. And I always remember him just taking off most of the shit. So like, I didn't have the talent to use too many tools. I think my talent was the minimum dose. So I've gone down that path. And making bold moves and dips within that, not always subtle things. Sometimes you're taking 10 dB out of a sound because you understand what you're trying to go for. And I just thought it was interesting to hear from Dude that like he's the opposite, but he just really respects this. And I'm just curious, and I don't think he's great because he does that. I think the tools he uses gets him to the desired result because of who he is, not because of what he does.
And I think it's a great anecdote, and I also think that that's what makes any of us that are any good at this continue to be good, is that we want to learn new stuff. I mean, there's lots of people in DMs and friends of mine as well that are appreciative of these conversations. I learn a shitload from these. Like I'm learning huge amounts of stuff just philosophically. I'm trying things, how to things that I've done for a long time, trying to explain them to you and in front of other people makes me rethink them. It's a really interesting process. And
that's fun.
I think it's really important for people to be excited about continuing to try to learn things. Cause we've talked about this a few times. You and I have both made significant changes to how we approach things. And, maybe people could look at where we're at and go, why would you try doing new things? It's like, the ultimate is when Tiger Woods at the top of his game was like, I want to redo my whole swing. And he took a year off and just was like, I can be better. I'm already the best in the world, but I can be better. The joy is in trying to find new things and get excited. Like, I'm going to try a new plug-in here. I'm going to try a new clipper. I'm going to try a new approach. I'm going to try a new philosophical thing. I'm going to try a new meditation practice. I'm going to try a new diet, all these things.
Everyone should listen to Jerry Seinfeld on Tim Ferriss podcast.
Oh, was that
for
recent?
Exactly what we're just talking about. Yeah, a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
2 weeks ago.
He's constant. He's just always in search of the best joke.
Ooh. Yeah, but he's more in search of the process that gets him the availability for it. And that's I can't say it as well as he can, because that's all I'm all about the process that alleviates all the stresses and everything that gets in the way of actually converging on an idea. And he talks about it and his success level is way more than mine.
High.
So there's a lot more weight to it than
he's got $1 billion in 30 years of success.
Just how he's instilling these values in his daughter, who's also a writer, and just like there's a lot in there. So I would just recommend that. It's not a long one. It's like an hour and 20, hour and 30. Sometimes these podcasts are long, that I recommend, that I understand that. But this is a digestible one. I'm on my second listen. I'm going to probably do 2 or 3.
Well, I like what you said there about getting rid of things that get in the way. And that's, I think, why you and I both bond on simplicity. As much as I have crazy sessions with way too many tracks, and then when I go in, I'm like, what can I do to simplify all of this? Because that will get you, it will waste less time. And it's the same thing with mixes. Why are you trying to make everything happen at once? There's 3 things that are important here, and everything else is meant to support it. EQ accordingly, perform it accordingly, choose the instruments accordingly, record the parts accordingly. All of that is about ultimately what is the focus of what you're trying to do and reducing everything that gets in the way of that.
Yeah.
That's a good place to end. How did we do on loudness, everybody? Hit us up. Let us know. If you're a Discord person, send me a DM. We're going to start getting that going. And much love, man. The chat loves you. I don't know if you can see it, but hearts and love. And
I haven't seen it the whole time.
It's lots of goat emojis. Y'all are the best. Highlight of the last year.
Thanks for sharing.
Stoked to mix after this. That's what I like to hear. People are like, I'm ready to mix.
Same. Me too.
That's my favorite.
Me too. Yeah. I feel that. I share that too.
Yeah, very exciting. All right. Love you, brother. And
love you.
I assume we'll jump to something else next week, but if people got more questions, hit me up.
Let's talk in the next couple of days about it.
Peace, guys.
Peace.